Hey everyone, video time. And as you saw in the title, we're going to be looking at fluids. It's one of the questions that get asked the most. When do I change my fluids? How often should I look? When and where and how? Truth be told, this video is not going to give you all the answers. I'm going to cover all the major fluids, but every car is different, right? And every fluid's different. Coolant, there's like 5, 6, 7 different types of coolants out there, both from manufacturer and aftermarket, and they all have their own recommendations and regulations. So first and foremost, always check your manual, check with the dealership, check online, everything like that to find out what the intervals are if you're not sure. But this video is really going to cover, I guess you could say, the basics. Like it gives you what the general information is, what you'll see for most manufacturers or most cars, things like that. So keep that in mind when you're watching it. It is just a guideline video, but it hopefully will shine some light for you and give you some ideas on what to think about. Let's get right to it, shall we? Let's start off with kind of the most major one, the one that you have to do the most frequent, aside from, topping up your washer fluid and filling up your gas, right? And that's your engine oil right over there. You'll see it's often marked with something that looks like a little can or pot that has maybe a little bit of, sometimes they'll have like a little mark coming out of it or a little drip going down, things like that. That really is engine oil. The reason I got to change so much and why it's so frequent, they're lifeblood of the engine. It keeps everything lubricated, keeps your car from seizing up. It's so important. That's why you have to do it the most frequent of any of the fluids that you have in the major operation of the car. So because of the operation of engine oil and how it works, it gets heated and cooled, it deals with all the extreme temperatures, deals with a lot of that friction and stuff in the engine. So it breaks down very easily. That's why it's got to be changed so frequently. So there was a time, not too long ago, 10, 15 years ago maybe, where engine oil is recommended to be changed every 3 months or 3,000 miles, which is 5,000 kilometers. That was kind of the general rule of thumb, I guess you could say. But a lot of things have changed in engines now. Engines are far more efficient. Conventional oil is more efficient. You've got synthetic fluids and everything. So generally speaking, it's very well accepted to go 6 months, 5,000 miles, 9,000 kilometers. That's kind of the go-to for your engine oil. Next up is transmission fluid. This here is something that's actually often overlooked or forgotten on the car, along with some of the other fluids. It's often marked with something like a red dot, or you'll see it maybe a little gear. It looks like a little gear or something like that on there, depending on the car and everything like that. Transmissions are super important to the car because, for those who really don't get the operation, basically when you have the engine and that's turning and that's getting all the power, then you need something to take that power and put it to the wheels. And the transmission, in summary, that's what it does. It's so important because if you don't change that fluid, you don't make sure it's up to date, it blows, your car's not moving. Now, with the recent emergence of CVT transmissions becoming more and more common, and with the advancements in step transmissions, I've been hearing a lot tossed around recently about how the transmission fluid lasts the life of the transmission. This is a bit misleading because you don't really know what the life of the transmission is, and of course the implication being when the transmission dies, you just get a new transmission, new fluid. But you still should maintain it even if it's a CVT and even if it's a brand new step transmission. Also, to explain what a step transmission is, that's a regular transmission. That's a transmission you see in all cars, aside from manual transmissions and everything. But it's pretty much I'm again generalizing significantly here, but essentially you have manual transmission, standard automatic transmissions, and then you have CVT transmissions. Step transmissions is what you see standard in regular cars, right? That's just the regular transmission where you have reverse, neutral, drive, and that's it. CVTs also have that, but of course now CVTs are a little bit more complex. They don't operate as standard step transmission. So if I'm mentioning step transmission, that's what I'm talking about. So when do you change the fluid? Well, for standard step transmission, it's generally accepted that you can do it every 2 years, 30,000 miles. That's 50,000 kilometers. That most cars covers and works okay. Should work, and as a general rule. CVTs, that's been far harder to pin down. Again, some of the manufacturers, I tried looking at a variety of manufacturers to get a feel for them, and some of them say life of the transmission. I don't like that term because that just tells me that it'll go until the transmission blows. How long does the transmission last? CVTs are relatively new, so we don't know what their life expectancy is. So generally, just based on everything I've read, across even cars that say life of transmission, 100,000 miles or 160,000 kilometers seems to be the go-to number. However, definitely check it out if you can because the ranges were so varied. I've seen as low as 80,000 miles, 130,000 kilometers, to as high as 180,000 miles, 290,000 kilometers for a CVT. So if you're going to do your CVT, this one I do recommend for sure checking with your manufacturer because the numbers are so varied. It's all over the place. But I think if you don't even need to, 100,000 should be a good number to go with. 100,000 miles, 160,000 kilometers. Let's talk about power steering next. Now this is the power steering here, and you can see it's clearly labeled power steering. However, some cars may have a picture that looks like maybe a steering wheel or anything like that. Power steering fluid itself, it's kind of really designated to the steering and suspension of the car. And mainly it converts when you turn the steering wheel on the car, it uses hydraulic pressure by the fluid to actually help you and assist you in regards to driving the car. And that's why it's, assisted. You see the word assist right there, right? That's what it does. It's use hydraulic pressure, so when you turn the steering wheel, it helps you turn the wheels and gives you smoother operation of the car. Power steering fluid is one of the most overlooked fluids, if not the most overlooked. I've talked with people over the years when I've been working on cars, and I've had people, everyone checks their engine oil, more or less. But some people check their brake fluid, some check their coolant, some check their transmission. Some people didn't even know they had power steering fluid. So, it is one of the most overlooked in my opinion. So it is something that, hopefully this is shining some light and making you check into it. Now, that said, when should you change it? Generally speaking, 65,000 miles or 105,000 kilometers seems to be the good rounded number to be flushing out your transmission. Years kind of vary, so I'm not going to give you a specific year. In transmission, power steering fluid, generally speaking, it seems to last pretty well, so I'm not going to even give you a year number. You hit 65,000 miles, 105,000 kilometers, go with that. Next up is brake fluid. Brake fluid is, most times I'll see it actually says it'll be labeled brake fluid. Sometimes it'll say .3, .4, something like that on there, and it'll be in something like this, normally very close to the driver's side of the car. Obviously, when you press the brakes, the next stop after the brake booster is over here. And really what that does is it has brake fluid in there. The fluid obviously operates the brakes. I think that's pretty obvious. But then also what it's actually doing is that the fluid in there is supposed to be uncompressed. There can be water in there. There can be air in there. And then when you press the brakes, it uses hydraulic pressure through the fluid to press all four brakes and squeeze them in at the brake level. That's what gets you to stop. That's in kind of a summary form of it, but that's essentially what it does. Now, brake fluid gets hit with heavy temperatures really quickly and then cools off. You hit the brakes, especially if you're a hard braker, you stop, the car stops really quickly, generates all that heat, and then off. And then you're off again and you're driving, and the wheel's creating motion, and that's cooling it down a bit. So it goes through a lot of extreme heat and cool, heat and cool, heat and cool a lot. As such, it tends to break down very quickly. No pun intended. So it can start developing air, it can start getting, lose its heat handling ability, and it can start building up some contaminants in there over time. So, when should you change it? Generally speaking, 30,000 miles, 49,000 kilometers is the good number. Now that's a complete flush and fill, not just bleeding out the system. Those are kind of two completely different things. Bleeding out the system is when you empty out all the brake fluid out of the system itself, and you put in brand new fresh fluid top to bottom. Bleeding out the system is when you go to each wheel, empty out the old fluid at the wheels, so you're not emptying all the fluid out, and then you're putting new ones in. That being said, for years and years and years, I've actually just done a complete bleed on the system, not a complete flush and fill. I felt it's a little bit unnecessary, and so far it's worked out perfect. And that's what I would think you do at the very least. You should at least bleed out the system. If you can get it flushed and filled, all the better. But 30,000 miles, 49,000 kilometers. Next up, you see kind of hitting back there is your differential. This is essential to part, especially when you have your transmission and everything like that, because just like the transmission, this converts engine movement into the wheels. If you have an all-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive car, this is what converts that movement over and gets you to actually get the rear wheels moving if you have something like that. This also needs to be changed as well and checked, and it's often overlooked, sometimes never being done at all. So when should you do your differential fluid? And also adding on to that, your transfer case as well, if you happen to have a transfer case. Well, that's 45,000 miles or 72,000 kilometers is the general number there to work with. You should still check it periodically, of course, and check and make sure the fluid's good and everything like that. But a good flush and fill on the differential fluid, it will go a long way in maintaining the life of your diff. Last, we're going to talk about coolant. And for example, on this car here, you have the coolant reservoir, which is over here. And then the rad is right here. So coolant is necessary for the car because it's what keeps it cool. As you know, we talked about engine oil and everything like that, and that keeps the car lubricated, but it still generates an enormous amount of heat. Like, you obviously never touch an engine, you wouldn't want to, but if you ever did, it's so hot. The coolant's what helps cool it down. So you have to make sure this is also working okay and that it's doing what it needs to do. You got to make sure it's clean and fresh, otherwise it's not going to be able to absorb that heat and dissipate it the way it needs to through the radiator. Now coolant, which is why they saved it for last, is one of the trickier ones because there's so many different types of coolants and everything that a lot of manufacturers have come up with. The original was the original glycol-based green one that you saw. This was the one that was pretty much standard for most years, most cars, but now so many different long life versions have been out there. Dexcool, Nissan has their own proprietary one, all sorts of stuff, and there's growing more and more and more different versions of coolant out there. So it's hard to really pin down what you should do for your car. If you're using have an older car, or well, actually even some of the newer cars still use it, and you have the standard green glycol coolant, then it should be flushed every 30,000 miles or 48,000 kilometers. Now, long life coolants, there's a little bit more variety in those numbers because different manufacturers have different things. So if you have something other than the standard green, you could be looking anywhere from 100,000 miles, 160,000 kilometers, to 150,000 miles, which is 240,000 kilometers. This one I couldn't really pin down because it was really hard to kind of find a middle ground, so an even point to work with. I mean, the numbers were so varied. So I guess you could probably look like kind of in between, right? 125,000 miles or 200,000 kilometers, give or take, right? It's kind of a good in-between number for a long life type of coolant. Now, the one exception I would make to that is Dexcool. Especially on older cars that use Dexcool. Newer Dexcool has been a little bit reformulated as time has gone, a little bit better. But older cars that have had Dexcool, 2004s, 2005, 6, 7, probably up to 2010, 2011 at the very latest there. It was one of the first coolants that came out that really advertised long life. And it advertised 150,000 miles or 240,000 kilometers or 5 years. But I've dealt with so many cars that the coolant breaks down far earlier than that. And you tend to get this kind of sludge or it actually becomes even like a clay within the system itself. If you don't regularly maintain the coolant in the car, this will become a big problem because it will build up and actually clog out the system, and it's very hard to clean and purge out. So for Dexcool specifically, dealing with GM cars for a number of years, I do recommend doing much earlier, 75,000 kilometers, 75,000 miles, 120,000 kilometers. That's my recommendation for especially the earlier cars that use early Dexcool or everything like that, just to be safe. All right, so that's it. Did you find this video helpful? I hope you did. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Make sure when you're commenting, you leave if you have any questions, anything you want to add on, absolutely leave it to. I try and answer whenever I can, as best as I can. If you do dislike, also comment, let me know. If there's something you didn't like about the video, something else you want to improve on, let me know. If I can make the content constantly better, it's only going to help you, it's only going to help me. So make sure you keep that in mind. But other than that, I want to thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next video.